Thanks, Gavin. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you guys and the group to really introduce BMI, Building Moisture Inspection. It's been a course that's been in development for about 3 to 4 years, and we've really tried hard to come up with a class that really bridges a gap between like a WRT class, ASD class of how to dry the building to really a class that teaches you how to find the water in a building. And so this is really it's a really broad class to teach a lot of the things about moisture and the relationship in buildings. And so I won't spend a lot of time on the presentation on some of these things just because it's some of its overlap and stuff like that, because I don't really need to teach you guys, what the IICRC is. But the building moisture in class is the acronym is BMI, and so you'll be able to find that on the IICRC website. You'll be able to find classes hopefully here in the near future for that class to be held. Just so you know, as you know, the IICRC headquarters is in Las Vegas. The 1st of October, we had our first BMI beta class, which allowed us to basically go in and present this course for the first time to a select group of people to see how the course came across to students and to get the flow down to make sure that we have the subject matter communicated in a way that we truly wanted to as a group of us that's put this class together. I served under Gabriel. Gabriel is the vice chair of the BMI committee. It was passed to Gabriel from Rachel Adams. It first started out as a building moisture or building thermography class. And we realized that was so limiting to what we really wanted the class to come across and become. And so we changed the name from building thermography to building moisture inspection to really give us a broader understanding or broader ability to go and fill in a lot of voids and a lot of gaps. Gabriel's out of Canada, really great instructor. If you've ever had a class with Gabriel, his charisma is very intoxicating, very motivating, and it just inspires you to learn. And when I met Gabriel, it was almost like he was a brother that I didn't know that I had, because we had so much in common. And we clicked and hit it off and have worked together for almost probably 3 years, working on getting the building moisture inspection class together. We have written our first manual, and we developed the course. We developed the questions, provided the answers and the distractors for the course, and are in that process now of coming up to the final stages of that to be able to open up to the public. If you don't know me, my name is John Stowe. I do own Covenant Restorations. I've got a wife and 4 kids, 5 grandkids, and outside of doing restoration work, I try to spend some time eating ice cream, riding my Harley Davidson, and digging in the dirt with hydraulics. Try to get away from a little bit of the water stuff they call the duty of owning a restoration company. I've been in the construction industry for over 30 years. In the restoration industry for the last 20. I do have a triple master status, 20 plus certifications. I also do subject matter expert. I testify as an expert witness in court. And so I'll go out and do forensic investigations on properties to try to figure out what happened and why, and write reports as to what the damage is and the costs associated to fix that damage, which really kind of brought me right into building moisture inspection. Because you have to understand in the restoration industry, since that's kind of the group that we're here today, we go out, we look at buildings, we try to find the water, we try to find where the water went, whether the cause of loss was a water leak, or whether it was a fire, or whether it was some other issue. Maybe it was a liability claim from somebody else's work in a piece of property. And so we really have to understand, what is BMI? And the purpose is to really to understand it as a comprehensive assessment. It's an investigation. It's looking at the whole entire building as a whole. The building itself, we're going to look at the design of the building. We're going to look at the location of the building. Where's the building built at? Is it on a coastal area, or is it in a higher elevation area? Is it in a area that has extreme seasonal changes? We're going to look at what the building is used for. Is it a gymnasium that has a lot of occupancy? Or is it a residential that has a high occupancy in the actual building itself? We'll go in depth and to try to look at the building materials that it was constructed with. What's the layering of each component of that building material, and how does that layering affect the next layer? To understand where the vapor barriers are at in the building, how the water can migrate and manage and work through that building and those materials. We're going to look at the environment around the building. How does the outside weather affect the building as a whole? And then how does the inside environment affect the building from the inside out? So how does the environment go from the outside in, and how does the environment go from the inside out? And then we'll, like I said earlier, we'll look for the occupancy of the building. And even this is something that's kind of, I guess, kind of challenging to think about, because you literally can have a microbial problem because of an occupancy issue. And how many people are using the building, and the use of water in the building will basically have an effect on how the building handles that many people in the building itself. So it really is a fascinating thing to think about all those things. So when we wrote this course, we tried to figure out, how do we bridge these gaps between the restoration industry and then the general public? Because oftentimes we go out into the world and try to figure out what went wrong and how it went wrong and what it's going to take to fix this. And oftentimes we can find ourselves trying to teach people the importance of what happened and the importance of what it's going to take to fix this. So we really wanted to try to fill in this gap between the knowledge of a restoration contractor and then the general public and any other party that might be affiliated, whether it be an adjuster, whether it be an engineer, whether it be an industrial hygienist. And I can't tell you the number of times that I personally have gone out to a loss and had to not only teach the customer where the water went, but also had to show the experts that these other parties brought in, like the industrial hygienist or the professional engineer, or maybe it's a building inspector or a construction consultant that's come in. And so we realized when creating this class, there's a void of knowledge in some of these professions that we wanted to try to fill. And we wanted to make sure that we presented this class to an audience that would be doing those type of inspections, those type of investigations to see what's affected and how it is affected and why it was affected. And so we really tried to make this class not really just for restoration people, but also for the general public and other professions. You probably understand, if you have a property that you're buying, you often have a real estate inspector, home inspector. And do they understand why the building's doing what it's doing? Does the industrial hygienist understand why the building's doing what it's doing? And these other people, these other professions have their certain level of expertise, but do they understand water? Do they understand the relationship of water to a building? And that's really what this class is for. So we wanted to bridge that gap and reach these groups of people in these different professions so that we all get on the same playing field. We're all on the same knowledge basis of how to inspect a building and where did the water go and how did it get there? Is this water related to what we're finding over here? Is there a connection, or are they two separate things? And so that's really the idea we wanted to try to go towards in that. So in this class, we're going to have 6 sections. And in these 6 sections, we'll talk about building science. We're going to talk about moisture dynamics. We're going to talk about measurements. We're going to talk about building assembly failures, the consequences, and the inspection and documentation process from a building moisture inspection standpoint. So when we talk about building science, we're not going to get deep into a lot of these subjects as far as what these subjects go. There's a lot of rabbit holes, or rabbit trails that one could go into, but we're going to try to cover some of the basics, because the class is not designed to make you into a PhD or some kind of high credentialized person, because we don't have enough time to teach everything in this stuff. So we're going to cover some of the basics of building science. We're going to have to talk about the understanding of how the science relates to the building, how the weather affects the inside, how the moisture management, whether it be from drainage on the outside or the moisture resistance of materials, how materials will absorb or resist water because of their composition, because of their makeup. What's the vapor diffusion of that particular product? What's the permeability of that product? And what happens to that product or that building material when it's exposed to those types of environments? We have to understand how the occupant behavior relates to the building science. And then we'll talk about energy efficiency and breathability, because you literally can take a structure and make it so tight, so airtight, because of insulation and house wraps and building materials and the layers of all those materials, that you literally can create a problem by trying to solve another problem that's not always seen up front. So we'll get into a lot of that. We'll talk about thermodynamics and how energy affects the building and how the water moves. We'll talk about convection, conduction, and radiation. We'll get into the climate zones, whether you're in an area that's extreme cold or extreme hot, extreme wet or extreme dry, and how all of those different seasonal changes can affect the building as a result of that. And then we'll talk about the airflow of how ventilation will have an aspect to the structure, whether you have air coming in for infiltration or air going out as exfiltration, and how those relationships work, and the signs and evidence that you'll see in a building material based on that airflow throughout the building or through the building. Then we'll go over here and we'll get into one too far. Moisture dynamics. We'll talk about the characteristics of water. We'll get into the aspects of the states of water, how the changes of water, the density. We'll get into evaporative cooling. We'll get into water migration, which is really an interesting phenomenon. So a lot of the science and the moisture dynamics kind of intermingle and combine and connect with each other to understand where the water went and how it could get somewhere else. In what way did it get there? Did it get there in a liquid form? Did it get there in a solid form, or did it get there in a vapor form? We'll talk about capillary action. We'll talk about how air in a building can move moisture. We'll talk about how vapor in a room or in a building can move moisture, not only from room to room, but also from the room atmosphere itself through the materials of the room or of the building. We'll talk about the mechanics of water and how the surface tension and vibrations, and whether it's hydroscopic or hydrophobic. We'll also get into the psychometry, where we're talking about the understanding. We as restorers understand the psychrometric chart, but we'll show you on the psychrometric chart how you may be at a certain temperature and a certain relative humidity, but there may be an object in that room that's at a lesser temperature that could be in risk of condensation or reaching dew point. So it's really a phenomenon of how all that stuff really works together there. Then we're going to go into the moisture or the measurements. We're going to talk about thermometers, whether it be a thermal imaging camera, a laser pointer, whether it be a a hygrometer measuring your temperature and relative humidity. We're going to go into moisture meters, kind of have a pretty good look at the moisture meters, whether it be invasive or non-invasive, penetrating or non-penetrating. We're going to talk about how far does a non-penetrating meter read into a building material and what are the limitations of those versus a penetrating meter. And to understand how the pins on a penetrating or an invasive meter read the amount of moisture that's being detected through that resistance between the meter itself, and then how to understand how the insulated pins work versus a non-insulated pin. We're going to talk about the ability of the meter to which one's most accurate for what type of measurement you're trying to take. We'll get into how a invasive moisture meter penetrating is more accurate when it comes to taking wood measurements. We'll get into some of the sensory things. What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you feeling in a building? And we often don't talk about this, but many of us have walked into a building that's been affected by water, and it just feels like there's moisture in the atmosphere. And that's probably because there is. And we're going to talk about how to measure that and how to monitor that and how that affects the building of itself. We're going to talk about how we monitor and measure indoor air quality, how that can be a factor in regards to building moisture inspection examination or inspection. And then we'll talk about some ASTM testing methods of how you can use some of these standards that are out there to take specific measurements of moisture levels of a building material. We'll talk about concrete. We'll talk about how to determine whether that building material is acceptable or not for the material you're going to be putting back on it. You know, concrete, that's a big question in our industry. When is the concrete dry? How do you check the concrete? We'll show you some techniques of how to measure concrete, and there's several of them, so that you can understand what you're doing and then what you're needing to do to where your risk and your liabilities come into play. I forgot to tell you, we're also going to talk about the calibration, how to check your calibration of your moisture meters. Because if you don't know if your meter is actually calibrated, or if you don't understand how long the meter or the hygrometer has to stay there in order for you to get an accurate reading. If you don't understand those things, then you could be misinterpreting or getting a false reading and relying on that and not realizing you're not getting a very accurate reading. So the next thing we're going to get into is building assembly failures. We're going to talk about the building envelope as a whole. We're going to talk about how the roof comes in and plays a factor, how the attic plays a factor, how the ceiling plays a factor, the walls. We'll talk about all of those things from the moisture coming from the outside in and how the moisture goes from the inside out, and the importance in the relationship between each of those components. We'll get into looking at, how on a roof line, the pitch of the roof. We'll talk about the type of material that the roof's made of, the ventilation in the attic and how that affects the moisture dynamics inside the building and in the attic itself, and even through to trying to get out the attic. Some of us may have some roofing experience, but you'll have blistering that can happen on a roof, and that's nothing more than the water trying to get out of the attic that it's trapped in. We'll talk about the foundation, how the elevation around the building can affect the moisture under the building and the migration underneath the building coming up. We'll talk about the location where the building is built, the type of soils that it's built on. We're going to talk about the subtype terrains. If you have expansive clay underneath your building and how that clay can affect the building, whether it holds moisture, expansive and contraction throughout that process. We'll talk about the building materials and what building materials will fail when it comes to a building's exposure to moisture. We already talked a little bit about the occupancy and how you could have so many people in a building that it actually could have complications and consequences to a building. And then many of us have a lot of experience on appliance failures and how those failures that use water or have water in them, a freezer can melt and cause water damage. Or you may have an ice maker, a dishwasher, a water softener, a hot water tank. We'll go into all of those type of appliances and how those can create a water situation. And then we're going to look at the mechanics, whether it's a air conditioning system that doesn't have proper ventilation or proper sizing of ductwork. Maintenance can be an issue of a mechanical failure of an HVAC system that doesn't allow enough moisture or enough airflow to go through the system to condensate on the evaporation coils, and it just blows on by and basically pumps moisture back into the building from that standpoint. Maybe it's the drain pan. It's not draining all the water out of it, and you have so much airflow going through it, you're having blow by and introducing water back into the building. And we'll get into the consequences. What are the consequences? What damage can happen? What do you see? We'll talk about baseboards. We'll talk about swelling, nail pops. We'll talk about how delamination can occur. Structural deterioration can occur. We'll talk about the microbial aspect of when mold can grow. And we're going to actually address some issues that we've taught in the past of how mold can grow on the surfaces at 16%, and how much humidity it takes in a building for water to start, or for mold or microbial growth to start occur on a structural framing member, wood. We come across some new research that's been put out that actually gives us a clearer understanding as to what that threshold is and where that threshold is at, where the danger areas are at. We're going to talk about the maintenance costs. If you have water or moisture issues inside of a building, it's going to increase your maintenance cost of the building from various things as far as materials that don't last as long as they used to, or are affected and deteriorate quicker than they should. We'll talk about the indoor air quality, how moisture in a building can lead to microbial growth, how that can affect the deterioration of the air quality inside of the structure. We're going to talk about how the consequences can have in a relationship because of the occupancy, where you have excess moisture or a lot of moisture in a building, and how that can relate to odors and how that can become problematic with dampness and physical and mental effects in that. And then this health issue is always a dangerous topic, but we want to just reiterate, we're not doctors, but we understand there are consequences that can happen as a result of the health and safety of the individuals. And we always want to refer them back to a professional medical person, but as a restorer, as an investigator, we need to have the passion and the compassion for the people we're working for to make sure we find all of the water, where the water goes, so that we can address those and not leave a problem for our customers, not leave a risk for our businesses to be litigated or potentially accused of missing things. And so we want to keep the health issues of the occupants in the back of our mind to find everything we can find and address everything we can address. And then the last section we're going to cover is the inspection and documentation. When conducting an inspection, safety is the utmost importance. Doing a hazard assessment, evaluation, and looking at the situation of what are we going to be involved in and how are we going to be able to address this? How are we going to be able to inspect this? What's in the way? What do we need to move? What do we need to look out for and watch out for? We'll talk about when we go to develop your inspection contracts. There's some things that need to be probably in your inspection contract to make sure that you define the scope of work. What are you there to inspect? Are you there to inspect an odor that's in this room? Are you there to inspect the whole entire building? Are you in a high-rise building and you're looking at one floor? Are you responsible for looking at the entire building with the floors above it and the floors below it? We're going to talk about what's the proper communication to have, how to ask questions. We'll talk about what are some of the questions you need to ask. We'll talk about what kind of questions you probably should ask and who you should ask those questions to. And talk about what your responsibilities are. Can you talk to the tenant, or can you talk to the property owner? Are you talking to the neighbor? Are you talking to the public? And who your chain of authority might be in an inspection process ultimately goes back to your commissioning party. Is who's hired you to go and investigate. Then we'll talk about the walkthrough, the initial site and safety assessment as you're going through the building and you're looking at the situation, and you may find something and how you might need to go back and communicate that back to a party that might be needing to know that information, and how to do a change order in your contract with what you're looking at. To say, hey, I found the water over here, but in my investigation, I went everywhere that I thought the water could go to. And then I went a little further to make sure I didn't miss anything. But in going a little further, I found that dry gap. I found the edge of the water, but I also found over here, there's another thing that's not related, but you have something else going on too. And it's being able to understand the relationship between what you're looking at over here, and to understand, okay, I found something over here. I don't need to connect these because they're two separate events, but I do need to notify the property owner or the building owner of what I've found and what I've gone through. And sometimes our walkthrough, and we go through the process of looking at the building, may cause us to have more questions that we want to go back and look and find out. We're going to be looking for, what's the history of the building? Have you had other water events in the past? Have there been any complaints of odor? Have there been any complaints of medical issues from the occupants that they think might be related? Or is there anything that might be there that we need to know about, that maybe we can go and look to see if we can find the evidence that matches the testimony, or maybe lines up with science? And so going through that whole process is almost, it's dynamic in the sense that it's not just a straight line, but it may actually have circles in it where you go back and recircle and go back through. And so we brought in the scientific method to this inspection process. And in that, we kind of developed this chart. We're at the first of this, and we're going through, and you're going through this process of your inspection, and you're going to be basically defining the statement of the problem. What's going on? What's happened? Why are you there? And then you're going to perform some research. We're going to have to go and ask. We're going to gather some information. We're going to take some observations. We're going to, look. Gather information. Maybe the building's history, maybe the building's age, maybe any remodels or renovations that's occurred and happened. Then we're going to take some observations. We're going to do a walk around. We're going to look through. We're going to just get our bearings in the situation, and then we're going to ask some questions. Well, what happened here? Has there anything gone on in this room here, or has there ever been any damage to the structure from a storm? And then we're going to develop a hypothesis. Is basically, what is it that we think might be happening? What do we think's causing the problem? And then once we develop that hypothesis, we may have one or two of those things, and we're not exactly sure which one it is. Or maybe we think it's just one of these things that's the problem, but then we need to test that. We need to basically rule out other potential causes, so that we can confirm where the moisture is coming from, and did we go through a testing process to basically eliminate other possibilities. Then we want to document our conclusions. Did we confirm the hypothesis? If we did, then we just go into the process of writing the report. If we didn't, we got to circle to, or go to the left, and we got to go to the right. Maybe part of it was answered, but it opened up another question. So we got to go back up and develop another hypothesis. If our testing didn't conclude anything or wasn't conclusive, we got to go towards the left and go back through that process to maybe either retest or redevelop a hypothesis until we get to the point where we've eliminated all possibilities of what's causing this moisture issue. And then we were able to conclude with a final synopsis of what the problem is in that. Then we report it. So at that point there, I do have some time for some questions and some answers. And so I don't know who might have some, but Gavin, if you've got some questions, I'll be happy to try to answer some.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any here. We didn't get any during the presentation, it looks like. If any of our wonderful attendees has any questions for John, I'm sure willing and able to answer them.
So while you're waiting on those, I will kind of just recover the process that we're in right now with BMI. Is we are in the beta testing phase of the class. And what that means is we've written the exam, we've written the teaching requirements, we've written the first instructional manual, we've created the exam, and then we have to go through a process of basically going through 3 beta classes. And when we go through those beta classes, we're going to be evaluating to make sure are our questions easily understood. And so we did this first beta class and we recognized and realized we needed to provide a little more context to the question, because if you're missing some information, you don't know how to answer it, then we needed to adjust that question. And so that's the process that we're in now. We've had that first beta class. We're making adjustments to possibly the exam itself. And then we're making adjustments to our instruction manual to make sure the flow is there and the subject matters are covered sufficiently so that the people can successfully pass the examination for the class.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a process when we're getting new things started. So I did have a question for you, John, here. David Simmons writes, do you have an ETA on when class will be available in Indianapolis? I would add on to that and ask if that is going to be a live stream online option course, or is it a mandatory in-person course?
So great questions. And I appreciate the question because it's important to have that answer. Right now, because we're still in the beta phase, we've finished one of them. We're going to do at least 2 more. We have one beta class scheduled right now in December. It's going to be in Canada. Then we have another one that's going to be in Las Vegas. That it's going to be those are basically these are kind of 2 closed classes. They're not open to the general public. Once we finish that one in Canada and we finish the one in Las Vegas, the next course that's scheduled or is being scheduled right now will be in the summertime. Remember, Gabriel's the only instructor right now. I've submitted my application to become an instructor. I'm going through the process through the IICRC to become an approved instructor. Once I and there's others that are putting their requirements and things together to submit. Once they have all those, we'll start to have more instructors become available. So these beta classes are really also opportunities for other instructors to come and take the class and pass the exam and then apply to be an instructor. So the more instructors we get, the more classes we'll be able to have out to the open to the general public. Now, as far as in-person or online, the course is approved to be taught online and it's approved to be taught in person. Now, personally, with this kind of a class, I believe there'll be a significant difference between an in-person class and an online class, because the in-person class, you're going to get your hands on the meters. We're going to do a mini moisture inspection. We're going to stage things in the room for the students to go and find, to go and document, to go and take measurements, moisture measurements on. And so obviously you can't do that if you're an online class. And so there is a downside to that from an online class, but there's definitely the convenience of not having to travel and so forth. So right now we don't have a class scheduled anywhere in the United States open to the general public, but I would anticipate that to be probably second quarter to the beginning of third quarter. So maybe by May, June, you'll start to see classes opening up to the general public. And I think the really big thing there would be to be able to maybe reach out to the IICRC, give them your name, your location, to where you would like to have a class at. Um, Gabriel and I are actually going to create a website called buildingmoisture.inspection.com, and you'll be able to go there and register to say, hey, I want to take this class, and we'll want to know where the next class is opened up at. And so if you're a BMI instructor, we want to be able to connect students who want to take this class to instructors to go teach in those areas that's closest to those people that are wanting the course.
Yeah, and if you're interested in a course specifically in Indianapolis, you can always search for the in-person version first to see what's scheduled and what's available, either in your area or surrounding areas. You may want to come to Las Vegas and take it here and make a vacation out of it and kill two birds with one stone, or at worst, you take it online. Online is less hands-on, obviously, but definitely more available and convenient. So it just depends on what really you're looking for. But it is a great question. Um, I have a question for you, John. Do you really have 5 grandkids?
I do.
Wow.
Five under the age of 4. Um, I'm 52 years old and have been doing restoration work since I got my feet wet in 2000, and then have started my own company in 2005. And so I appreciate the compliment, not thinking that I'm that old. So, but thank you.
You look like you're in the same age group, range as me. You look good. Speaking of moisture, you must have a good skincare routine, I guess.
Apparently so. It's the filter on the camera.
Sure, sure. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, concerns, compliments. I'm not seeing anything else, so we'll probably get this one wrapped up a little bit early. But for all you certified firm folks, you'll be given your continuing education credit for attending with us. Get the report next day or two, and you should see it probably sometime next week within your continuing education. So thank you for attending and showing up. And I appreciate all of you guys. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendees. So I see a lot of these folks attend monthly with us, and I'm very, very happy about that. Spread the word so everybody gets their free CECs. Some of those continuing education classes can range into the hundreds of dollars. So it's always a good benefit to take advantage of when you can, attend one a month and get your free credits that way. So keep keeping on with that. And anything else you want to add to this, John, before we wrap it up?
Well, I would say I would encourage anybody in the restoration business to seriously consider coming to the BMI class. Um, you don't know what you don't know, and you need to know what you know. And so, with those two extreme situations, there, the intent of this class is to help you confirm what you know and to learn what you don't know. And then to recognize there's a liability that we're leaving by not being able to find all the moisture to our companies. There's a risk, there's an exposure there. And on the other side of that, there's an opportunity to make sure that we're taking care of everything out there. We as certified firms are always trying to make a profit and looking for ways to increase those margins. And what if we're missing 10, 15, 20% of the moisture because we didn't find it all? And so there's an opportunity. I even think this kind of class could help increase your bottom line and protect your bottom end. So I really want to encourage students to really consider this class. It's going to be good.
Absolutely. Can't hurt to learn more and get more certification. It just looks good on the individual, in my opinion.
Sure.
But yeah, it was a pleasure meeting you, John, and thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to do this for us and give us some of this information. And I will get the recording and put it within the certified firm toolbox probably again next week, when it's ready. And anybody that wants to get this information can find it in their toolbox. So we'll have it ready in there.
Sounds great.
And I got nothing else to add, and everything looks good to me. So we'll go ahead and end this meeting. And again, I appreciate all of our attendees and our presenter, John Stowe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.